Welcome to the Extensor Medical Version 6 software instruction video. If you have any questions, please contact Extensor Technical Support at 1-866-927-5222 extension 240. When you want to use Extensor's Medical Version 6 desktop software, you start in the lower left corner of your computer screen, where you'll find the Start menu. Find Programs, and then Extensor Technology Corporation. All installed Extensor software will be present in this list. So if you find Extensor Medical Version 6 software, you can open up that software just with a single click. You begin to see the software open, and then if the software has not yet seen the sensor that you have attached to your desktop system, it will download the profile data, and you'll be ready to begin. You'll see a clear grid illustrating the size and height of the sensor. If the grid does not appear, you can start a new session by either clicking on the blank page icon in the upper left portion of the toolbar, or going to File, and then New. Here you'll see the sensor that you have attached to the system. In this case, I have an LX100 363602 sensor attached, with an active pressure range up to 200 millimeters of mercury. You see the Calibration Manager button here. I see that my current sensor was calibrated on December 1st, 2008. But if I have additional calibration ranges built into the sensor, I'm able to view them here. Here I see that I also have a calibration range of 5 to 200 millimeters of mercury, which was calibrated on June 18th, 2009. Once I've decided on a calibration range, in this case I'll select 10 to 200, I select OK, and I'm ready to proceed. If you don't yet see the sensor attached to the system in this window, you can always click on the Refresh button as a way of refreshing the list of sensors. Check to make sure that your system is properly attached, and then press the Refresh button. If it still does not yet appear, check again, and then reopen the software. There are a few more options we can change before starting a session. Under the Basic Recording tab, we can set recording speed. Currently, it's set at 3636 frames per minute. We can change SPK performance. SPK stands for Sensor Pack, part of your system. And we have a variety of different options there, from fastest through recommended, accuracy, and maximum accuracy. So you trade off speed for accuracy, or vice versa. We'll go with recommended in this case, and that's the default setting. We can also set recording duration. So if you want to limit the length of the recording, you can do so here. Let's set this at 10 minutes instead of 1. And we see that the estimated recording time and file size have both changed from 10 minutes and then up to around 91.5 megabytes. We can also change a couple options on the Advanced Recording tab. The first is Recording Preview Mode. Recording Preview Mode is the ability to view the person sitting on the sensor prior to actually recording data. That is, we can see a pressure image, but without it recording and taking up space on our hard drive. The other is for time compensation. And so for certain Extensor products, such as the PX100 sensor series, we have compensating algorithms in the software that increase the sensor's accuracy and gives you a more representative view of actual pressures on the sensor. On the Other Settings tab, we have the option to load templates that would be included as part of our session. The first is Sensor Group Template. So if you've previously defined sensor groups, that is, areas of the sensor that you want specific data from, you can load them here, simply by clicking on the Open File Folder icon. You would then locate the sensor groups on your hard drive, load them up, and they'd be present prior to recording. We can do the same with notes templates, so if we've previously entered in certain fields that we always want filled out as part of a pressure imaging session, we would again click on the Open File folder, and then locate the template where we've saved it on our hard drive. Using each of these options makes it much easier if you're doing repetitive pressure imaging. That is, you want to always measure certain areas, or you always want to record certain notes to go along with your pressure imaging session. Once we've set up the session to our liking, we can click on OK, and we're ready to start. I'm going to do that now. I click on OK, and I see my sensor grid. That records the 36 rows across, and then the 36 rows down that are present on my LX100 363602 sensor. The first thing that we want to look for after we've started this session is basic versus advanced medical mode. So in this version of the software, based on feedback from our users, we decided to implement two different levels of usage. One that would favor the less advanced user, and then one for a more advanced user who would want to get more features out of their software. To select between the two, we go up to the top toolbar, where currently I have advanced medical mode selected. Here though, we're able to switch to basic mode, or to default to basic mode. That is, whenever we open the software, we would automatically get basic mode as our default. In basic mode, we won't see the same range of options available to us in terms of features in the software. Let me show you. I'm going to switch to basic mode. The program tells me that it requires a restart in order to start in basic mode. I'm going to click yes. I see the software close and then restart. It's once again going to enumerate or profile my sensors. And once it's downloaded the data, I'm ready to begin. Here in basic mode, we see a much more basic set of tools available to us, such as record, and then a variety of different views. It does also include the seating assessment guide, which is the major addition to Medical Version 6 software. However, to show you the full range of features available, I am going to switch back to advanced mode for the remainder of this training video. The first and most critical thing I'm going to show you how to do is how to record. So we look to the bright red circle in the upper toolbar. Clicking on this bright red circle will actually begin the recording process. I'm sitting on my LX100 363602 sensor on top of a mix of a foam and air bladder wheelchair cushion right now. So when I press record, I'm actually able to see the pressure image for the first time. In the lower right, you'll begin to see a bunch of red markings. That's because I actually have my wallet in my back pocket, which is an important lesson for us, that we ask patients to remove any objects from their back pocket, including sharp objects such as house keys. I'm recording data, and I can see that as I shift back and forth across my body, I see varying levels of pressure. But I am capturing pressure from my lower body right through to my knees, so I am properly positioned on the sensor. Now that I've recorded some frames, I can actually go back and review them. The way to start at the beginning of the recording is to look for the rewind button. It's the furthest most left of the playback buttons in the top toolbar. If I click on this button, I'm brought back to the first frame of my recording. If I want to move backward or forward one frame in the recording at any point, I can use the step forward and then step backward button in the top toolbar. If I simply want to play the video back, I can press the play button, and it will begin to play back frame by frame like a video. I'm going to stop the video, and I'll show you the bottom slider bar. So across the bottom, you'll see a slider bar that shows the entire length of the recording. So if I click on the bar at any point, I can move to that frame. If I want to move further along the recording, I simply click further along the bar. And I am able to pinpoint data at any point on the recording this way. I can always tell what frame of the session I'm at in the lower right corner of the screen, where I can see that the current date is July 1st, 2009. That's 2:47 p.m., the time at which the recording was done. and then I'm at frame 4577 out of a total of 6,000 frames. If I look to the top right corner of the screen, I see a statistics window. It's telling me that I have pad 0017 attached to the system. My average pressure at this particular frame is 47.49 millimeters of mercury. I have a peak pressure of 170.72 millimeters of mercury, and I have a contact area of 1,162.9 centimeters squared. As you can see, if I click at any point of the slider bar and move to a different frame, that data changes. I now have 48.86 millimeters of mercury as my average pressure, and then so on. So I'm always able to pinpoint the amount of pressure being put on the sensor, either as an average, as a peak, or in terms of contact area. The next thing we need to pay attention to is the pressure legend. So at the bottom of this pressure legend, it tells me that I have a pressure range on this sensor of 10 to 200 millimeters of mercury. So I'll see the extent from 0 up to 200 millimeters of mercury on the pressure legend, with 200 milliliters of mercury representing red values on my pressure image, and lower pressures representing green or blue values. Since there are 1,296 sensing points on the sensor I'm sitting on, the numbers on the pressure scale in the white column will add up to 1,296, since these are the number of sensing points that are reading within a particular range. So, for instance, I see that between 34.52 and 40.65 millimeters of mercury, I have 67 sensing points. So I can tell that 67 out of 1,296 sensing points fall within this range. Reading the pressure legend isn't as simple as blue is good and red is bad, since the scale can be changed to help you identify areas of peak pressure. Right now I can see that I have just a single point on my pressure image that would be of concern, that's showing either yellow or red. But if I turn the pressure scale down, that is, I decrease the peak threshold value, I can make the image look much different. So I'm going to click on 108.06 as an example. Now that I've clicked on 108.06 and made it the top value on my pressure scale, I can see that I actually see a lot of yellow and red. This might cause me concern. However, it is just the one area, which I can see if I turn it back up, that would be of concern. Where on my right side of my body, I can see a yellow and red pressure point, even when the pressure legend is set at its peak of 200 millimeters of mercury. So it's important that when you're comparing different surfaces, that you make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. That is, you're comparing cushions or seating surfaces at the same peak threshold level. One of the nice things about X3 Medical version 6 software is that you can also change the lower discard threshold on this pressure legend. So if I click on the 10 to 200 text at the bottom of the pressure legend, I have a dialog box open up, where I can change the lower discard threshold to something lower than 10. Let's say I change it to 7. So now I'll see all of the values from 7 to 200 millimeters of mercury instead of 10 to 200. What this results in is actually a more complete pressure image, so I'm able to see low pressure areas that I wouldn't have seen before. However, in the course of doing a seating assessment, I don't often need these low values, so I'm going to turn it back up to 10. And I get a very clear outline of where on the sensor I'm seeing pressure from my body. If I want to add some notes to be included with my pressure imaging session, I can do so in the notes area on the right side of the screen. Here are types of details about that peak pressure point that we're currently seeing on the right side of my body. So I'm able to describe the conditions or particulars about my pressure imaging session here. I have a couple other options too. If I want to add notes pages, I simply click on the plus icon. If I wish to delete a notes page, I can click on the red X icon. And if I wish to open up a previous notes template, I can click on the diskette icon. If I want to add images to my session, also to be included in the saved version of the file, I can do so in the Images window. If I want to add an image, I simply click on the plus icon, which will open up a dialog box. From there I can select any image located on my hard drive, press open, and then have it included. In this case, I just have a picture of a dog that was sitting on my hard drive. So I'm able to include that and then save that in the file by clicking on the diskette in the upper left corner of the screen. I can then save my file, in this case on my desktop, and all of the images that you see here, all of the notes, are all saved within a single file, so I'm able to open and then do a comprehensive review of everything that I completed today. With the basics of recording and playback now covered, let me show you a few different ways you can view the pressure imaging data that you've recorded. I'm currently in a 2D mode, but I can also switch to a 2D numeric mode. That is, I can go to a diagram that shows me the pressure image data that's recorded for each cell on my sensor. So I can tell as an example that on that pressure point on the right side of my body that we saw pressure of 170.27 millimeters of mercury. Or that on the front of my right thigh we had a pressure point of 36.16 millimeters of mercury. So I'm able to actually see the data that's recorded for each sensor. If I switch to 3D mode, I'm able to see the pressure image in 3 dimensions. And I'm able to see the peak pressure points in clear relief. So to alter this diagram, I actually just click and drag. So I'm able to tilt it, or tilt and rotate it. So I'm able to see it from different angles. Also under the 3D mode, I'm able to switch to a chair configuration. So if I have 2 sensors attached that form a back and then a seat, I'm actually able to see them in 3 dimensions in that configuration. That is, I can see the back in 3D, and I can also see the seat in 3D. And so I can see how they're positioned vis-a-vis one another. Moving down the line, we have some very useful graphs. So I'll start with the pressure distribution graph. Here we can see the percentage of values that fall within a certain pressure range. So let me show you an example. In the first column we have 36.35% of values falling within 10 and 37.14 millimeters of mercury. So that's telling us that at this particular frame, that 36.35% of values fell within that pressure range, over the 1296 sensing points on the sensor. By contrast, if we move to the right side of the menu, we can see that only 0.14% of pressure values measured by the sensor on this frame occurred between 145 and 172 millimeters of mercury. This graph is sometimes underutilized in the clinical facilities that we get to visit because it really shows the distribution of values across the entire pressure range. So if you're looking for pressure redistribution or looking to establish the lowest pressures on the body, we would see most of the values fall within the first 2 or 3 columns. If we're beginning to see values falling on the outer part of the graph, that would express that there are high pressures that are of definite concern to us, and therefore we would complete an adjustment to the seat or to the design of the seat that would seek to minimize those pressures. Under the graphs icon, we also have a pressure versus time graph. So this tells us what the pressures were at a particular frame over the entire recording, but we're able to actually move along this graph and see what the pressure was at that point too. So when pressure really peaked or dropped off, we're able to view where that was. I can use the back and forth icons on the slider bar here at the bottom to move to a particular frame. So I'm able to see the pressure at any point in the recording, along with the pressure data in the legend to the right here. This is a good indicator if you've had a particular shift or increase in pressure, or in contrast a decrease in pressure that you're interested in. So if a patient shifted in a certain way that caused pressure to spike, you could see exactly what that pressure was, and at what point in the actual recording that occurred at. Most of the views that I've shown you so far are actually also available on our X3 display software, but let me show you a couple views that are unique to the desktop. If I go to the top toolbar and I click on multi-view mode, I'm given a different set of data. So I get a 2D pressure image, a pressure distribution graph, and also a pressure versus time graph. Multi-view mode is a useful mode because it enables you to see all of the data at once. So you can look at pressure distribution, a pressure image, and a pressure versus time graph, and then be able to see at a particular frame what the data is. With that frame, we also see our pressure legend change to reflect the number of measurements in each sensing range. Moving along the top toolbar, we can also look at the frame compare mode. So clicking on that will open up a window where we're able to select 4 different frames. Here I already had 4 selected, but normally this would be blank, so we're able to switch between frames and select 4 that we want to compare. Once I press OK, I'll actually be able to see all 4 frames at once. If I click on any of these frames, it'll become the active frame, and I'm able to see the pressure data for each frame. In the statistics window, we also see that we see average pressure, peak pressure, and contact area for each of the frames that we selected. So we're really able to compare within the same session the pressure data that we've recorded. In the top toolbar, to change the views, we can also rotate the appearance of the sensors. So looking next to the frame compare button, we see a yellow rotational arrow. If I click on that arrow, I'm able to rotate each of the sensors that I see on screen so as to optimize their position for my viewing. If I'm in 3D mode, especially the chair configuration mode, I can use the pull-down area to select between the active sensors. So in this case I recorded from a single sensor, but if there were 2 sensors attached, I'd be able to select one and then rotate it, but without rotating the other. Here we can flip the sensors vertically, or we can also flip them horizontally. So this is a menu in which we can switch the orientation of the sensors to make it easier to view them. There are a couple items that we still have to go over in the top menu bar. We can click on the pressure threshold, so this red and blue graph. That'll open up the same menu that we got when we clicked on the bottom of the pressure legend, where we can raise or lower the upper and lower discard thresholds. So if we don't want to see values below 10 millimeters of mercury, we can do it here. Or if we want to limit it to values under 150 millimeters of mercury, we could do it here by selecting the upper discard threshold and then typing in that number. Alternatively, if we've changed things and want to resume the default settings, we can click on defaults and it'll go back to how the software was originally set. Clicking on OK will confirm all of these options. Moving on, we can also define sensor groups. Sensor groups option is in the top toolbar almost to the immediate right. Defining sensor groups is very useful if we complete a series of regular measurements. That is, we always know that pressure will always reside on a certain part of the sensor or in a certain way. This is also useful if we want to draw out data for a particular area of the sensor where we've seen an interesting measurement. So if I click on sensor groups, I get the sensor groups window coming up. I don't see that I've defined any sensor groups already for this particular image, but I can do so by looking to the right side of the box and clicking on New. So I click on New to create a new sensor group, and I see that Group 1 has appeared. So I'm able to select the selection mode. That is, what type of sensor group I wish to define. Rectangles will define a rectangular area, triangles a triangular area. We can also select lines, freehand, or do an auto pick. So let's select lines as an example. So if I select lines, and then I move my cursor over the pressure image, I'm able to select a line across the sensor that functions as a group. So I'm able to see within that group how many sensing points I have, average pressure, peak pressure, minimum pressure, contact area, the area of the group, and the contact percentage. So if I were to define another line, I'll select New again, and I'll define another line, but this time I'll select one that's outside of the area being measured. So now that I have that line defined, I can see that I had a count of 33 sensing points, an average of 57.81, and so on. I can also see that the contact area for that area is much lower. So let me show you the other views here that we can use. Triangles. So clicking and then defining a triangular area by letting go and then clicking again, I can get a triangle of area. Again, that will tell me what that group is. Moving further, I can select one by one. So I could actually select cells in a different area to be included in a group. So if I wanted a sampling of different cells, I'm able to do that by clicking on different areas. I'm able to export statistics based on these groups. So if I select current frame, I can export frame 7947, and then I can export either as an extensor file, HTML, text, or CSV, which is a Microsoft Excel compatible format. So if I export a CSV, I'm able to save that file on my desktop. If now I go out to my desktop, I'm able to enter into that file by clicking on it, and I'll have Microsoft Excel open up. So I'm actually able to see all of the data that I drew out in those groups in an Excel spreadsheet. This is very useful for being able to run group data through statistical engines such as Excel or MATLAB for detailed analysis. Here I can see the file name, the units, the lower threshold, and the frame that I looked at, and I'm able to see the pressure measurements from each cell that I defined. If I move further down the graph, I'm able to see the group data, so I can see the individual pressure cell data from each of the stencils in the group. And therefore I could run analysis on all of them and see in what patterns they occurred. Moving back into the Extensor software, I can summarize by saying that sensor groups are an excellent way of drawing out the key areas of pressure on any recording, and are very useful for detailed analysis of the pressure data. As a final item on the top toolbar, we have the seating assessment guide, marked by the wheelchair icon on the far right of the screen. The seating assessment guide is best left as a separate video, which is available from Extensor or should be part of this download package. Please watch it for a detailed instruction on how to use the seating assessment guide. The seating assessment guide is a valuable comparative tool that enables you to compare different seat cushions and add in required documentation, such as a Braden risk assessment, presenting conditions information, and equipment lists that can be compared and then reported upon. So we're able to compare cushion surfaces with all of the normal process that would go with doing a seating assessment. Now that we've covered all the basics of the main screen, let's go into each of the top menus in detail and show you all the different things that you can do. Let's start with the File menu. There we have the ability to create a new session, open a session, close the existing session, save the existing session, and import and export. Let me explain these in greater detail. The important option for most users is export. So this is the feature that enables you to take data out of your current session and export it in a variety of different file formats, such as the Extensor file format, HTML, text, or CSV, which is the Excel format I showed you earlier. We have a variety of different selection options here. We can add the current frame, add a specific interval, or add a special frame. The interval is probably the most important. So that's the one that would enable you to add a specific set of frames or all the frames at once. So if I were to select between 1 and 1000, I would have all those frames added into my document. So you can see the counter begin to accumulate, and I have all of the frames available for my export. So I can click on any of these file formats to save them. So if I wanted to save it as text, I would save it there. And it's going to save all the data from all of those frames in a text file, which I'm then able to go and open. And this text file has all of that data within those frames available for me. So I'm able to see in all the stencils where the pressure values occurred. Moving back to the software and back to the export window, I'm able to add special too. I'm able to add all frames with the comments, or I'm able to add specific frames. So say all frames where pressure value was above 50 millimeters of mercury for each group, as an example. So it's going to pick out those frames for me, and then I'll get the data specific to those frames and those groups that I defined earlier. So in the end, I have 3,476 frames that meet that criteria. Moving further down the File menu, I can select a variety of printing options. The place to start is Print Layout. I'm going to click on it and open it up. So this is the layout that the printing will follow. So you have your main view, that is your pressure image, the legend, and then sensor statistics, notes, and images. So if I want to turn any of these options off to be included in the printing, I can simply click on this checkbox on the right. So I just turned off sensor statistics. But if I want to add frame notes back in, I could do that. And then I can drag it into the spot where statistics used to be. And I can resize each box. So now all of my frame notes are included in that space and will be available on my printout. The page layout option is a great way of organizing information to create a single summary page of your pressure imaging session. So a way that's representative of all the work that you did, that you could hand off to a colleague, to show a patient, or to put in a file folder. Closing out this box, we do have a couple other printing options. We can select Print Preview, so we can see exactly how that image is going to print out on the page, according to what we did in the Print Layout box. So we're actually able to see that I didn't enter any notes for frames 7949, but I did have general notes. I have my image, the pressure legend, and then the image itself in grayscale. On the top we see the file name, frame, range, average, and peak pressures, and also area. So we're able to see all of that data that's representative of our session. Moving on to the Edit menu, we don't really see any options that we haven't already gone over. So in this menu we do have the option to rotate the active sensor, to flip the sensor vertically or horizontally, and to define which is the active sensor. So if we had two sensors attached, we could select the active one and then rotate it or flip it around to improve our viewpoint. Moving on to the View item, we have the ability to select the different views that we went over in the toolbar, but we can add a couple different things. We can click on Show Center of Pressure. This will place a marker in the center of the image that will show the center of pressure as it was recorded. So I can see that the center of all the pressure values recorded was actually further towards my right thigh. So I'm able to see that I was tilting slightly towards the right, and that marks the center of pressure. This also works from side to side too, so I can see whether the pressure was centered perhaps towards my knees or towards my back. And so I'd be able to see whether from side to side or from front to back where the center of pressure fell during my session. Note that the center of pressure will change if there are shifts in the pressure during the session, so using the slider bar I'll illustrate this. So if I move to further along the session, we actually see the center of pressure moving. So If a patient shifts around, we'll see that center of pressure relocate as time goes by and as the pressure values change. So it's a good indicator also of where pressure resides when the patient shifts around, and you need to see in which direction that pressure shift moves. The next tool I'll show you is either achieved by right-clicking the mouse on the pressure image, or going up to the View option and selecting 2D magnifier window. And so whenever you're in a 2D view, you can always magnify an area of 3 sensing cells by 4 sensing cells high and look at the specific pressure values for each of those cells. So I'm able to zoom in on a cell and figure out how high the pressure is there. So I simply right-click on any other point on the pressure map, and I'm able to see the data for those cells. So if I have a cell of particular interest, I can zoom in on it and figure out what the pressure is at that point. This is a very useful way of figuring out where peak pressures reside and what areas that you need to address through a seating solution. Also on the View menu are a bunch of different options that you can use for the frame controls that we saw in the toolbar: pressure legend, statistics window, notes window, and images window. The one that we don't see before is the video image window. So a feature of the Extensor software is that you can attach a webcam to your computer and simultaneously record video to go with the pressure image. So you could run them in sync with each other and see how shifts in the patient or in the object were reflected in the pressure image itself. So if I click on that, I get the video image window appearing on the right side here. No camera is detected, but if I did have a webcam attached to my computer, I'd be able to turn it on using the lower right button here and begin recording simultaneous to doing pressure imaging. So I'd be able to record a subject or a patient and then play them back in sync. The options menu has a wealth of different settings that you can change to change the appearance of the screen and change how you do actual pressure imaging. Let's start with 2D and general display. On surface type, we can change the appearance of the pressure image to reflect different views. Right now I have squares selected, but I can also select contours and then apply. And so we saw how the pressure image changed there. Or I can select smooth. And again, the pressure image changes appearance to smooth over any bumps or changes in pressure. I prefer contours generally. We can also select whether to outline or just fill the points out. So if we click on outline and then apply, we see an outline of where pressure changes, so it's easier to delineate between areas of different pressure. You can also deselect filled. So we're actually able to see the pressure image without all the filler in there. Generally, I keep the pressure image on my screen as filled and as contours. So I'll reapply that. I can add a grid overlay to the pressure image. So if I want to add lines to it, to help separate it a little bit more and figure out what zones pressure are occurring in, I can do that. Or I can do the same thing with dots, which is a little bit less obtrusive. So I can see the dots throughout the grid that separate one area from another. Other options include the ability to rotate row and column labels. So if I want to switch around the row and column labels, I can do that, and they'll move from one side to another. I can also change my orientation marker. So that's this red dot where we have the first row moving across and down the sensors. So if I want to move that around, I can just select orientation marker and it will rotate for me. Group transparency. So if I have groups applied to a 2D view, I can change them to be more or less transparent. So if I have groups defined, they'll either overlap the view, or I'll be able to see through them and clearly through to the pressure image. I prefer to keep this somewhere in the middle. Display settings. We can set it to normal or high resolution. Selecting high resolution will increase the detail of the pressure image. Low pressure color enables me to change between a clear or a normal, that is, a blue background to the pressure image. So any cell that isn't recording pressure will appear clear right now, but if I want to change that to normal and then apply it, I'll see that my diagram fills in with a blue background. I prefer clear because it enables me to clearly see whether the patient is squarely positioned on the sensor. For the isobar palette, we can either go to color or monotone. So right now, the pressure legend is in a series of colors running from red down to dark blue. But if I were to change this, it actually changed to black and white. So for printing purposes, I'd be able to more clearly see what areas were of highest pressure and which areas showed very little pressure. Let's switch back that to color because it's easier to understand. For the isobar spectrum, I can change it to have different numbers of value ranges. So if I want to change the pressure legend down to only 11 isobars, I can move it down to only 11 ranges. Alternatively, if I wanted a finer analysis, I could apply 65 isobars, and there would be much different coloration of the pressure image and the pressure legend, with finer delineation between pressure ranges in which the values are falling. Finally, I can turn the upper discard threshold on and off by deselecting and selecting this box. What this will do is it'll employ the upper discard threshold, so currently set at 200. But if values were falling over 200 and I didn't want to use it, I could deselect it, and then all of those values would be in fact visible. Now we can look at the 3D options. So the first thing we want to do is switch over to a 3D view. We then go to Options and 3D. As with the 2D settings, we can change the appearance of the surface type from squares to contours or bars, and either fill or just outline them. Unlike the 2D view, we can also choose surface direction. So a positive surface direction will be indicated by higher pressures being illustrated by higher peaks, but moving in an upward direction from the bottom of the image. If we select a negative surface direction and then apply, we can see that the direction changes. Moving out to the image, if we rotate it to be flat, we can now see that the image has moved in a negative direction. Formerly, we would have seen that in a positive direction. So we can see higher pressures as being further downward rather than further upward. Moving back into the Options menu and selecting 3D, we have a couple other different options. We can select a black background color and apply it, so the image is much clearer with an outline of the sensor. Then we can choose the renderer to be either Windows or an OpenGL, which is compatible with some video cards. We can turn on and off 3D tool icons. We'll see them disappear from the bottom of the screen. We can make those tools transparent, and we can also add a sensor outline. So turning off the sensor outline will actually make the outline of the sensor disappear, so we can't see its edges anymore. With all these changes made, we click on OK, and we're ready to continue. Continuing through the Options menu, we can now go to Playback and Recording. We can play back at the recorded rate, play at a faster rate than normal, so we could say 150% of the normal speed, or we could also say less than normal, 50% of the normal speed, or we could play at a defined rate. So we could play, say, at 10 frames a second or much higher than that, depending on the data recording that we did. At the end of the session, we can have it loop back or simply stop. Loop back meaning that you would replay the session from the beginning again. We can display the frame time in actual or elapsed, so we can tell what frame we're at or the number of frames that have already gone by. And when we do compare mode, we can link the playback. So if we start the playback on one compare mode, that is one session or one frame, they'll play back simultaneously for easy comparison. Again, we have the ability to turn on preview mode, we can enable time compensation, and we can delineate overlapping sensors. So when two sensors are attached to the same system, and they may overlap, they may have what we call crosstalk or interference with each other. but telling the computer that they are overlapping can eliminate some of these effects. We can also display refresh rate changes, so we can make it a higher or a slower refresh rate as we play it back and as we record. Under Program Options, we can change several aspects of unit formatting and window setting. We can change the pressure units that we measure in to move from millimeters of mercury to a unit such as pounds per square inch, depending on our preferences. Typically in the medical profession, though, millimeters of mercury is the standard. We can change surface area units. So if you're in the US or the rest of the world, you can switch between metric and imperial units, or in sensors. We can change date format, time format, and number format, and we can change what we see in the statistics windows. Currently we have average pressure, peak pressure, and contact area all selected, which is recommended. Finally, we have video capture options. So if we had a camera selected, we could select that video device and then be able to set image settings, such as image format and compression levels, to adjust the size of the file that we would eventually generate. From there, we would then be able to record and play back the video alongside the pressure image. We've now gone through all of the options menus, and we're ready to move on to tools, which holds a variety of different tools. As mentioned before, the Seating Assessment Guide has a separate instruction video, which you should consult for advice on using the Seating Assessment Guide. So I'll move down to sensor calibration. This is where we have the calibration manager, where you can calibrate a sensor, or you can see the raw sensor settings, that is, those without calibration. Calibration Manager is used in conjunction with an Xsensor calibration chamber, provided by Xsensor. However, we recommend that you do send your sensors back to Xsensor for factory calibration whenever needed. Moving further down the Tools menu, we can see Sensor Groups, which we already covered, Image Attachments, which was also covered, and the first new option is Merge Frame Mode. So if we click on it, we can actually merge frames. So if we want to go into that mode, we can select frames to merge based on average or peak pressure values, and it'll show us an image that represents all of those frames in a combined average pressure or peak pressure diagram. So I'm going to select peak pressure, and I have frames 2 to 500 selected, and I'll push OK. I'm then given an average document of frames 2 to 500 based on peak pressures. So I can see on the right here that I had an average pressure of 55.7, peak pressure of 183.57, and a coverage area of 1301 square centimeters. And this represents, accurately, frames 2 through 500. I could apply this to as big or as small a range as I wanted. It's a good way of indicating a representative picture of the patient sitting on the sensor pad. The next option underneath the Tools menu is the Compare Files option, which enables you to compare up to 4 different files. Here I already have 2 selected, and I'm able to play them back simultaneously. And so we can watch each as shifts happen and pressure values change. We have 2 pressure legends, and we also have a statistics window for the active window that we're watching. So in my second video called Untitled 10, I can see all of the pressure values there. This is an excellent way of comparing 2 different sessions, such as a patient on different cushions, or the same patient on the same cushion at different times. So an excellent comparative tool for looking at different files and comparing between different surfaces. We can turn off Compare Files mode by clicking on this option again, and we'll go back to our single file. Also on Tools menu is Compare Frames. So we can once again compare frames from the same recording. In this case, I don't have data until later in the recording, and so I select those frames. and go OK. And I'm able to see all 4 frames at once from a single recording. I can remove frames from a session. So in this particular session, I don't have a lot of data in the first few frames, so I'm going to remove frames, say 1 through 1200, and go OK, and those frames are then removed. So if I were to play it back, I have a session with data throughout, so I can eliminate frames where no data was recorded. X3 Display Manager is a tool that we use to connect the X3 display to the desktop software and download files from it. I won't cover how to use it here since we do have a separate video that covers all the different ways you can download files from an X3 handheld display. If you wish to check the connection status of your system, you click on this option. It will show you the different components in your system, such as the sensor pack and the sensor that you're running. This is a great way of checking to see whether your system is operating properly in its entirety. And if you see anything other than a green check mark here, you know that part of your system is not connected properly or may be experiencing technical difficulties. Reconnect, close the software, and then attempt to load it up again. From there it should usually work, but if not, call Xsensor Technical Support at 1-866-927-5222, extension 240. If at any point you reconnect, and then you wish to refresh the list, you can click on the lower left of this box, and it should refresh and show a properly operating system. If not, you can copy it to the clipboard, and then paste it into another document as a way of documenting where the fault occurred, so you can pass that information to Xsensor's Technical Support Department. This is a good point to wrap up our session. So underneath the Help menu, we have a variety of help topics, where if I click on Help Topics, I get our help file loaded up, which has a variety of different topics covering how to operate your software in great detail. If there's something that you don't see there, or if you have any questions, please call Xsensor Technical Support. But there is a search feature available, so search the keywords that you aim to find, and you should be able to find the help that you need. Also under the Help menu is information about Xsensor, a link to our website, a window where you can tile or cascade so you can keep multiple windows open, or connect with an Xsensor technician. So what you can do is enable logging, so it'll record all of your steps, and then the Xsensor technician could then look at it and determine what problems you may be experiencing and how those problems occurred. This wraps up the end of our video. As always, if you have any questions about how to use your software or any Xsensor product, please contact Xsensor's Technical Support Department at 1-866-927-5222, extension 240. Thank you for using Xsensor's products. We welcome any suggestions you have about future versions of the software and features that you would like included, improved, or altered in any way. You can pass those along to sales@xsensor.com. Thank you again, and we hope you enjoy using our system. Goodbye.